So what you see here is not your typical skyscraper. In the heart of downtown Caracas, more than 800 families moved into the third tallest building in Venezuela. Funding collapsed when in 1994, the building was left standing. A half-dead giant in the middle of the capital. 13 years later, a group of organized barrio dwellers moved in and transformed the 45-story tower into a home. There were no elevators, there was no running water, there was no sewage, there was no windows. Everything had to be added. Services, sporting facilities, alongside makeshift housing units. So, is it architecture? Yes, it is. I would argue that Torre David is a work of collective architecture. I would also say that it has emerged because of the failure of my generation to attend the realities of the city in the 21st century. This is Gladys. She was one of the organizers of the original occupation, and she was our way into the tower. Before Torre David, Gladys lived in a barrio, and despite its deficiencies, she survived, and she promised her 2 daughters for a safe place to live. Torre David, for her, cannot be reduced to a concrete and steel symbol of the failure of Caracas. But actually, she dreams of transforming the building into a middle-class, mixed-use housing complex, the kind of home you and I would aspire to. So here are some key numbers: 53, 33, and 96. They illustrate the most basic way in which we're on our last chance, and we heard that a lot today, on our last chance to define a sustainable urban future. 53 is the percentage of the global population that is moved into cities. We're past the tipping point, and you all know it. 33 is the percentage of city dwellers that live in informal settlements. These are the places defined by lack of infrastructure, running water, sanitation, and electricity. By insecure tenure rights, and by the constant threat of eviction. Stop and think about that for a moment. Almost 1 billion people living in slums. In some cities like Lagos, of 21 million, 70% lives in this way. And the informal city is only going to grow. Finally, 96 is the percentage of the urban population in developing countries that is expected to rise in the next 15 years. The poorest urban areas in the world are swelling at such a rate that they're expected to double in population by 2030. And where's that going to be? It's going to be in informal communities. In short, we've entered an urban age. But what kind of urban age? Not the glittering lights of Manhattan, not the boulevards of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. I would argue that these are illusions that mask the true nature of how cities will be in the future. What I've experienced on my many travels is a juxtaposition of the Parisopolis favela juxtaposed against the towers of Murumbi, the luxury towers of Murumbi in Sao Paulo. Or in Kibera, for instance, where you have in the middle of Nairobi a city within a city of 1 million people. This is the story of the growing informal city, one that will redefine our urban experience in our lifetimes. By informal, I don't mean the inverse of formal. I mean an information city, a city that's being formed, a city that's rhizomatic. It's mutating in unexpected ways, in patterns. For architects and designers, the informal can be an incredible laboratory. a kind of exploration, an urban innovation lab on adaptation and resilience, a kind of do-it-yourself urbanism. It's also the story about what it means to be an architect in the 21st century. When my partner and I, Hubert Klumpner, and I began our work in Caracas 20 years ago, we were confronted with unlearning everything we had learned in New York City. Why? Because there was in Caracas no rational system of zoning. There were no established property rights. There was not well-enforced rules and regulations. Confronted by this chaotic logic, in my hometown, we had to invent a different approach, a new type of architect, a moderator of sorts, one that could bridge the gap between top-down and bottom-up. We've focused our energy on trying to learn from the successes and devise ways to ease their failures, on building an urban toolbox, a collection of prototypes and strategies that can be used in close collaboration with communities. And this is key. We need to fit out a vision of a city that's dynamic, not static. It's about retrofitting, modifying, stacking, consolidating, reverse engineering existing spaces to give marginalized communities greater equality and access to the formal city. It's leaving the communities where they are and building a new city with them. Our toolbox comprises of a series of interlocking strategies, what we refer to as tactics. Targeted micro-interventions, a kind of urban acupuncture that transform the wider urban environment in small ways. The days of idealistic master planning are over. 20th century is littered with failed examples of terrible urban renewal projects. And they miss the point. Why? Because cities are about people and communities. For us, the first step was to gain a deep understanding of the status quo on the ground, often in areas where no maps are drawn, or actually, if they're drawn, they're badly drawn. So we need to visualize the potentials of these risk zones. We need to visualize the social factors to understand how the local social relationships are mapped onto the physical. We need to diagnose morphology to understand how slums are built piece, by approximation and adjustment. Step 2 involves focusing on sensible and responsible design that can empower the community. For example, using a modular, prefabricated set of parts, structures designed to be assembled in a standardized set of elements. Materials need to be resourced to improve quality and safety standards. We need to reduce construction costs. And then we capture the unused space. We rehabilitate by layering on top of this space overlooked surfaces. Then we add the final infrastructure that has a transformative social impact. This is Siete, to get more specific. He's a community leader in Caracas, in Barrio La Cruz. He's been working tirelessly to call attention to the government to create better recreation spaces for the kids. And the local basketball court where he worked on was controlled by gangs. One way of capturing unused space is by going vertical, achieving a high-density urbanism that can build layer on top of layer. It's led to the idea of the vertical gym. The gym captures space by superimposing its foundation on an existing open site, or basketball court if there is, or vacant lot. It goes vertical because the structure can be configured to different programs that are necessary or over time spans. When the first of the 4 gyms was built in Caracas, in Siete's community in 2004, it contributed to a 30% drop in crime in the area. And from 12 people playing futsal on the site, controlled by gangs, on a decaying pitch, it has now 15,000 repeated users per month. A defining characteristic of informal areas is the need for more infrastructure. This is the Caracas barrio of San Agustin. It's a slum segregated from the formal city by valleys and highways and rivers. Residents have to forge their way up 2 hours in stairs, poorly maintained steps, by the way, and when it rains, impossible. The local municipality thought of the great idea to build a road network. We thought that was disastrous because it would displace 30% of the existing population if you built roads up that hill. So we went to a cable car company. And with Doppelmayr, we were able to create a small urban footprint, a cable car system using technology that was for alpine slopes. And you know that those are pretty much all built out. So by diagnosing the topography, by visualizing social factors, and by adding the stations of infrastructure, going to the grain, we were able to build a network of 2.4 kilometers in a circular fashion off the subway stations, and we can move 1,200 people up the hill every hour. Thanks to the metro cable, the barrio is now tied to the city core. And by plugging social infrastructure all around the stations, like cultural facilities, healthcare centers, and 5 station hubs, the project has multiplied its social impact. It's like a necklace of pearls. Another example. This is Pumezo, the community leader of BT section in Kailiche in Cape Town. It's a township of 1 million people. He's the founder of an organization, We Are Here, and working very closely with another NGO called Ikailami. Last year, Pumezo has moved in to the new Empower Shack, a housing unit that we're testing, a housing prototype, actually done with collaboration between ETH and EPFL. It's addressing the huge housing shortfall that exists. And we just give them the basic unit that they can expand in a kit of parts. And it has a solar panel on top to give them absolute energy subsistency. And if any of you want, we need people to sponsor more shacks. By adding an extra floor on the existing 1-story shack, residents can then rent the ground floor, they can receive an income, or they can start a shop. This is the empowerment. Not only the solar, but the empowerment of going up vertical permits them to do this extra leap. By using a modular system, a kit of parts, and we can cluster 2 or 3 shacks together around a central core, infrastructure core. And we're working to this fabricated kit of parts to improve methods, but to be built by the community themselves. And then we can bring shared infrastructures like toilets. But back to Caracas. Maybe some of you know it. It's my city. It's exploding in an upheaval because previous generations didn't address the problems of urban dysfunction. They used to say the barrio dwellers would come down off the mountain. Well, they did. Where does that leave us? But I tell you, Caracas is everywhere. I tell all my students that to have an effective urban acupuncture, architects and planners must be willing to step out of their comfort zone, to confront reality. We need to be willing to experiment with out-of-the-box thinking. We need to understand that low tech is sometimes okay. And we need to be comfortable that maybe your designs will be finished by someone else. So let's learn what's emerged here in favelas, where our attention was elsewhere. Builders were left to their own devices, and they created incredible living units with astonishing resilience and ingenuity, because governments can't build fast enough, cheap enough, and well enough. I'm not a romantic. There's much work to be done to address this urban situation, to address these critical questions of spatial equality and injustice. We need to focus on the urban poor, but not necessitate impoverished architecture. We have to give the best designs to the worst areas. Up to now, so much of architecture we've seen has been based on the idea of creation, of rather than adaptation, signature buildings. Architects need to be ready to focus on ethics as much as aesthetics. Architects need to let go of their egos and embrace the sharing ethos of open source design for the poor and engaging companies around the world. Thank you.